Tonight's story is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction.
Who's gone off? Today we are canceling the apocalypse!
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet.
And this is?
Lilu Dallas Multipass.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Houston, we have a problem.
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Now, where was I?
Welcome to another installment of NostalgiaBusters, where we delve into the depths of comedy cinema to take a fresh look at old material and ask the question, does this hold up and would it get made today? And this time around, I'm going to be talking about Three Amigos, as you can probably guess from looking at the title of this episode. And we have with us here Adal Rifai. He is an improviser, producer, writer, corporate training director, adjunct lecturer, and prolific podcaster. And for some reason, he's decided to come back for the fourth time. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Paul, it's because you treat me so well.
Oh, I do try.
You're very kind. You set a warm table, and I'm happy to sit at it any time.
All right. Well, I will hold you to that, sir. You may reject.
Oh no, I'm ruined.
I'll just kind of run through the nuts and bolts real quick, and then we'll sort of dive into Three Amigos. First of all, directed by John Landis with a budget of $25 million and a box office take of $39,246,734 US dollars, and that was apparently all domestic, and starring Chevy Chase, Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Alfonso Aro. I might be mispronouncing that. I apologize if I am. Tony Plana, Patrice Martinez, and the late great Phil Hartman for one scene as well. So first of all, I'll dive in and say that Three Amigos was your pick, because I reached out asking if you wanted to come on, and you threw this one out. So what was it that made you pick this one?
I mean, I have other movies that I enjoy more, especially from that 80s period, in terms of like Coming to America, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Beetlejuice, Little Shop of Horrors. Right. But I felt like in terms of thinking about a movie that I absolutely adored as a child or a teenager, I haven't seen in a long time, and just thinking off the top of my head of like, what's a movie that maybe couldn't be remade? And I couldn't quite remember all of this movie, and I was like, maybe Three Amigos? I'd have to go back and watch it. So I think it was just one that stood out to me in terms of, was there anything that didn't hold up? Was there problematic stuff? I mean, almost immediately you mentioned John Landis. I mean, he's there's a lot wrong there. But it was just one of those movies where I'm like, I think it's a movie I adore. It's one of my favorite comedies, but it's far enough down the list that I feel like hopefully I can talk about it from a place of not feeling too close to it, to where I could still pick holes in it or still have my gripes.
Right. Okay. And in terms of my experience with Three Amigos, the first time I watched Three Amigos was 2 days ago. So,
ooh, congratulations.
Yes, well, thank you. I think I knew of this film in as far as I know about the Three Caballeros, and this film has often been sort of linked with that. In fact, that was originally the working title for it. And my in-laws have actually mentioned this as being a film that they like. I mean, they really like Chevy Chase, so that was going to be a film that they would probably enjoy. And I went into it I didn't look into it at all before I started watching it, and I figured I would just hit play and see what I thought. And I will say, I don't know if this is going to be an unpopular opinion or not, it didn't really grab me. Like I didn't.
Interesting. Okay.
I didn't find it laugh out loud funny myself. Now, we can get into bits and pieces of that in a little bit, but I wanted to make sure I said that up front. I'm not just going to be bashing the film or anything like that, but yeah.
I was just making a note for June 22nd or June 21st, depending where you're at. June 22nd, 2024, I was going to send you a card and a gift basket on your Amigoversary to celebrate 1 year of you first watching this movie. But now I have to rescind that offer, I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, you could still send it. Maybe just send a bunch of cactuses or something. Make it a prickly gift.
Perfect, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. And a painted backdrop that I can put somewhere as well. But yeah, no. I mean, going into with this film, I will say, having done a little bit of looking into the background of this, I don't know if this film would have been different if, we mentioned John Landis at the start, if he hadn't been on trial for what happened during the Twilight Zone film, then he probably would have had more say over the editing of this film, because during post-production he was on trial, which meant the studio came in and did a bunch of editing and heavily edited this film. So quite potentially the reason that I didn't quite enjoy it or didn't find it as funny is because it got the most studio notes any film has probably ever gotten, because they just went and did what they wanted. So yeah, I know there were a bunch of deleted scenes. Fran Drescher was apparently in it.
Yeah, she's supposed to be in the beginning portion.
Yeah, as Miss Renee, you do see the billboard with her character in it, but yeah, completely cut. and not only was her stuff cut, but the majority of the deleted scenes have actually been lost because nobody bothered to save them. So it's
well, Paul, let's do a hard pivot. Let's do Trading Places. So we're here to talk about John Landis's again Trading Places. Poor.
Well, you know, I haven't watched that film recently, so I feel like that would be a slightly weirder episode. But yeah, I think we can we can move forward with this one.
Okay.
So one thing, the very first note that I actually put down for this was that the opening credits really made me feel like my TV was going to shake itself off the wall. And rewatching that on my TV, and it does not stay still. It's just bouncing up and down. The whole thing. No. So that was just an odd thing I noticed. But since it is one of your favorite films from when you were younger, so what are some of your favorite bits from it? What were the bits that made you laugh out loud during it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember this is a movie where I mean, I should just preface this by saying, as a child, maybe around 7 or 8, somewhere around there, my parents started introducing me to a lot of stuff that maybe I shouldn't have been introduced to. This movie, I believe, is rated PG, so it's not. There's nothing too salacious or anything. But I just feel like I was introduced to a lot at a very young age, and I really glommed onto that. I really was like thrilled to be like, oh, this is what my parents are watching, and therefore this is like adult content, and I really enjoy the weird dark stuff or whatever this is.
Right.
But I specifically remember this being a lot of delightful set pieces in terms of like even just the very, very, very opening, which is the three of them on horseback in their full garb, in their sort of mariachi suits, singing a song, and there's a point where they like sustain a high note for like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's not, they're not putting too fine a point on it. It's not super clever or anything. It's just like, it's just funny, almost, I don't know if slapstick would be the right term, but it's just funny in a way of like, this is funny because they're hitting a high note and I didn't expect that. It goes to unexpected places. And the other, I mean, one of my favorite moments in movie history is when the three of them are in the bar, and there's been this confusion of like the German comes in and says, my friends will be here. They're like not as nice as me. They're murderous. You know, this German guy just killed a bunch of people, and he's like, my friends are even worse than I am. So you better treat them with respect. And then the Three Amigos come in. It's a comedy of errors. There's a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
The bar thinks they're the murderous, terrible people. So they're all terrified of them, and they put on this little song and dance that it just I cannot not grin ear to ear whenever I watch that scene. I'm so tickled by it. I'm so delighted when they sing My Little Buttercup and they do the choreographed dance. It just tickles me to no end. It's truly one of my favorite things from any movie. The other moments, I mean, the set piece of like Steve Martin being chained up in jail and him doing like the moving forward bit by bit and then slamming back to the wall.
Yeah.
The whole there's like a weird fantastical turn it takes at one point, like this weird Odyssey fantasy moment where they have to find a singing bush and find the invisible swordsman.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what is this? And then there's like the campfire moment where they're sitting on the most egregiously fake looking Southwest lot.
Yep.
And all these animals come and the horses start singing and a turtle is talking, and it's just, to me as a kid, I'm just like, this is so goofy and weird and fun and joyous. And I think one of the main elements I love so much, or I remember loving so much, is that a lot of the humor comes from the three main characters being blowhards and dumb and goofy and like meaning well, but just constantly stepping in it. So I love that they're very much aiming all their punches at their own face for the most part.
Yeah.
Versus any sort of like, trying to undermine others or whatever that might be. Also, I remember as a kid being in, I don't know if it was like 4th grade or something, and I remember using the word plethora because I had seen this movie 4 or 5 times as a kid. I remember using the word plethora and the teacher being like, what's going on? And I'm like, plethora. And they're like, how do you know that word? And I'm like, plethora of piñatas. So I remember like impressing a teacher by knowing the word plethora from a young age, specifically from this movie.
Yeah, and although the fun part about that as well is the entire joke of that scene is that he's trying to get the henchman to say, do you actually know what it means? But at no point do they actually explain what that word means if you don't know it. So
yes, yeah, I believe my mom at some point explained it to me.
I would imagine,
but also context. I think context helps out a lot.
Yeah, it is something that is, I would say, relatively easy to put together.
To extrapolate it all.
Yeah.
I think there's also, I mean, just to chime in with one other thing I sort of like about it, especially rewatching it just hours ago. I think El Guapo, one, is just a great name. I think it's Spanish for like the handsome one or something. El Guapo, amazing name. And I also feel like I'm not going to say that this is like a powerhouse of character study or like all the characters are extremely fleshed out, but I do really enjoy that as the main villain, El Guapo is given these humorous moments that the movie's almost like generous of like, let's let the villain score too and be funny. And there's these moments of like his like number one henchman being like, you know what, El Guapo? I don't think you're mad at me because I use the word plethora. I think you're mad because you're turning 40. And he's like, no, So I love that there's this like reflection and weird psychoanalyst to me, it's just delightful to let a villain be more than just a sneer and a threat. I think it's fun to make them like in on the fun, and they have their own thing going, and even they have their faults, and I just find that really charming, even if it's not, it's nothing more than maybe 2 moments in the movie.
Yeah, and I will say I think the best character in the film for me is El Guapo. Definitely the one that I had the most fun watching, which is actually kind of surprising to me because I love Steve Martin. He is a powerhouse when he's given the chance to be, and it almost felt like he was playing it too straight. For
really?
This one. Like just a little bit, because I mean, obviously the situation is fantastical, and he is he's playing as part of this threesome, but I'm not the biggest fan of Chevy Chase, so potentially it's because I wasn't enjoying the banter between those two, and I felt a lot of that didn't quite work. So that probably what did it for me there. And Martin Short was just a weird character.
I think he's delightful. I think he's so boyish. Like there's something very it's almost like Tony Hale as Buster in Arrested Development or something, where it's like there's something boyish and charming and weirdly energetic, but in a silly way. Like when he makes the joke about the plane's little balls and stuff. There's something about it that just tickles me. Like it seemed like, and to me, I think, I mean, I always imagined that the three of them were having a blast on set, because there's moments even when they're like sneaking around. There's a moment where they're like sneaking around El Guapo's compound, and like Steve Martin's making these like weird, almost ballet moves, and it just seems like they're putting a lot of mustard on the ball of like they're even moments that should be pretty straightforward. They seem to be having fun with. So Chevy Chase I used to enjoy. Nothing But Trouble is a favorite of mine, even though it's objectively a terrible movie. But I think as time passed and he got more weird and racist or whatever else happened on the Community set, I think he's fallen off my my list.
Yeah, it's like I just quick aside. Yeah, when it comes to Chevy Chase, really the only time I've enjoyed watching him do his stuff would be one scene in Christmas Vacation, and that would be the scene where he finally loses it. I think it's very good with that, but the rest of that film I was just like meh on him, and I think that's kind of continued anytime I've seen him on screen. But
fair enough. What did I have to ask, Paul? What did you think of? Again, one of my favorite bits of all time from any movie is when Steve Martin is on the roof and he's like, "I'll make a bird sound to alert you to," and they're directly below him. They're like 5 feet below him, and he makes the bird sound. They don't look up, and then he starts to like pepper in words, and he's like, "You two, look up here, look up here." To me, I mean, that to me, I can't not laugh at that. That's hilarious to me.
I will be completely honest. I'm not sure I even cracked a smile for that one. Now, I could obviously see what they were doing, and the comedy there is the fact that these two guys are completely incompetent and not actually paying any attention. But it felt like it just kept going. Just kept, I feel like if they had, the studio cut a whole bunch of stuff apparently, but they couldn't cut this scene down. I don't know if potentially it was just the mindset I was in when I was watching it, and maybe if I went back and watched it now, because like thinking back on it, like that was Steve Martin just being Steve Martin. Like that's the sort of, like, that's almost Sergeant Bilko-esque, like that sort of stuff. That it is. So. I should have enjoyed that bit, but for whatever reason, I didn't quite latch onto it at that point. Personally, I think by the end of the film, I was enjoying watching the Three Amigos.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but by the time they're storming the compound, like that, at that point, I'd kind of, felt like I could appreciate the characters a bit more, and as you mentioned, Steve Martin in the prison. Probably one of the oddest set pieces I've ever seen.
It almost feels, and this might have predated this movie, but it almost feels like a Princess Bride type of thing.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, you've got the cranking machine. No, absolutely. That, I think this came out.
This was 86, I think.
This came out a year before I was born, and I think Princess Bride came out the year I was born. So I think this does predate that.
I also just the moment where when Steve Martin gets shot and he finds the blood and he's so annoyed and he's like, "Let me see your gun," and he pulls out the bullet and he goes, "Real bullets? You're in big trouble, mister." And then the slow realization, the walk back, and the deadpan delivery of, "It's real.
Yeah,
it's all real." I mean, I don't know. Maybe I have more nostalgia, and maybe I'm closer to this than I think, and you're the new viewer, so.
No, I do agree that scene was good. That I really enjoyed watching him in that, and again, that's kind of peak Steve Martin type humor, where he is just, he's outraged at finding out that something is not the way he thinks it is.
Yes.
It's always fun to see him in that. Now, another thing I looked into with this film, they originally had a different cast, and then they were potentially going to have another different cast as well.
I heard that it was originally, was it Steve Martin, Dan Aykroyd, and John Belushi?
Yeah, so Steve Martin as Lucky, Dan Aykroyd as Dusty, and John Belushi as Ned was the original casting for it. And then I think it took a while for the film to even start getting made, and then obviously John Belushi was suddenly unavailable.
The politest way to put it.
Yep.
And then I think they wanted John Candy. Is that right?
They initially were going to go with John Candy. It was Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and John Candy. But he was deemed too big to ride a horse. So now, I believe, if I remember correctly, he ended up riding a horse like 5 years later in another film. So really, he could have done it. I don't know if they just didn't have a horse that he could ride at that time. But he's actually the one that recommended Martin Short. So that's how that connection was made. But at a certain point in time, Steven Spielberg was going to be attached to this project. And the cast list that he had was Steve Martin, since this is a Steve Martin vehicle, Bill Murray as the Dusty character, and Robin Williams as Ned.
Ooh, that would have been very interesting.
Yeah, like that. I could see him. It would almost be a sort of a lighter version of his character from The Birdcage, I think. Like, especially thinking of that scene where Martin Short's character is basically being like, I went to this set and this old actress was saying, "You've got it, mister."
That's I feel like Bill Murray and Robin Williams are almost like the bookends of comedian, because Robin Williams is just like pure coke-filled engine madness, and Bill Murray's like the most subdued, dry, sarcastic, annoyed comedian. He very much is the put upon. Like, he does put upon better than Steve Martin. I think. It's a very different version of it, but he absolutely has that. So potentially, it could have been Bill Murray being Lucky, and then Steve Martin being Dusty, and I think that would have been an interesting mix there. But I feel like Robin Williams would have ended up stealing the show just because. Absolutely.
He's Robin Williams.
He would have done so much improv on set that they just feel like, I guess we have to keep this because it's brilliant.
Yeah. They definitely would have had two different rating versions of the film by the end of it. So I think at this point we could probably start getting into if you feel that this film holds up. So is there anything on your rewatch of this film that you noticed that either maybe you didn't laugh at as much as you thought you were going to, or anything that you noticed that would be like, nah, actually that joke doesn't fly now, like it's something that you didn't like?
I had a tough time in terms of kind of discerning, and maybe I'm like old enough to where I'm just not like hip enough to what whatever the pulse of the nation is, but I feel like there's still, to me, there's lines that I thought were still funny, of like when they first walk into the bar, Martin Short, Chevy Chase, and Steve Martin walk into a bar that's 50, 60 Mexican gentlemen. They walk up to the bar, and Steve Martin goes, "Excuse me, we're not Mexican. We're from out of town." And to me, I was like, that's a killer line. but it's because he's ignorant or he has no self, whatever that might be. But I am curious of like, I don't know if that would be offensive. And then there's also when Chevy Chase is eating, he's trying to eat like a soft tortilla taco, and all the fillings fall out, and he turns to the old woman who just cooked the meal in Mexico, and he goes, "Do you have anything besides Mexican food?" And I'm like, I think that's a funny line, but again, I don't know. I don't know what would be considered sort of inappropriate.
Well, I had to say that second one with do you have anything besides Mexican food? That is a perfect, ignorant tourist line, which they basically are. So I would say that's fine. The other one about saying that we're not Mexican, we're from out of town. I think that one potentially borderline. I could see just cutting off the first half of that. Yeah. And having it be like, because they're obviously not from there, so just having him be like, we're from out of town. Like, I think that. Like,
but to me, it's funny because it's obvious. Like,
right.
Like the guy wouldn't know, but to me, I
mean, I will say, based on just some films from the period, I didn't notice as much humor in it that I felt wouldn't still fly. Like, like there's definitely some ways that this film could have gone, depending on who was directing it or who wrote it. Potentially Chevy Chase might have said something, now that we know his things about him. But I didn't see anything that I felt was too egregious in terms of lines of dialogue or things like that.
I mean, El Guapo and his I forget his right hand guy's name.
Jefe, I think.
Oh, Jefe. So El Guapo and Jefe have an exchange about the woman captor they have, which I think wouldn't fly today. And then also maybe the Chevy Chase moment where El Guapo's trying to remember, like, where do I know you from? What did we do together? And Chevy Chase talks about fucking the horses and all this stuff. So I feel like maybe those moments would go the way of the dodo. But other than that, I feel like most of the dialogue I think holds up pretty well. And then also, I mean, I was also just shocked to go back and watch this as an adult. Like I haven't seen this movie in maybe 20 years. I can't recall. Oh, wow. But I was surprised to see that it's basically like our three leads: Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short. We have appearances, guest spots by John Lovitz, Phil Hartman, and Joe Mantegna, which are that whole scene's maybe 2 minutes. Yeah. We have the three Germans, and then besides that, it's like 4,000 indigenous extras and actors, and so I was surprised of like this is one of the most diverse, non-Mexican Latino movies that I've ever seen, and it's from 1986. Yeah. I couldn't tell you if every single actor is, if there was maybe some casting that wasn't on nail on the head in terms of like ethnicity, but on first appearance, I was very surprised that it was that way.
Yeah, no, it was as you say, it was a little bit of a shock to be like, oh no, they actually took the time and they did film in Mexico, and they clearly got a large number of people. Potentially they just kind of went around and were just like, you want to be extras in the back of a scene? Here you go. Like, they, rather than, bringing a bunch of people and, putting on, brown face or something like that. Which
very
was
thankful
still
that
being
did not
done.
was the case. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was kind of interesting. One thing I did find just a little weird, and and potentially, that they're trying to show that these people are out in the middle of nowhere and that sort of stuff. But this film was set in 1916, and I don't know if you noticed, but there is not a single car or other form of automobile in Mexico in the entire film. Everyone's just riding around on horses, despite the fact that cars were brought to Mexico in 1903. So it was just this, obviously, and yes, I understand it's a comedy film about the three amigos who ride around on horseback, and so everyone's just going to ride on horseback. But it really felt like they were trying to be, the sort of the mid 1800s frontier, Western type thing. And yet they very clearly showed that it was set in 1916. So it was just a bit of a weird.
Is it a thing of like? I have no idea. Do you know when like the Nickelodeon was invented? Like when? I guess movies were commonplace, because I think is it maybe a thing of like they had to be movie stars in the silent era, but then they're also maybe movies weren't around popularized until 19 whatever.
Potentially, I mean, they very clearly are big silent film stars in America, but it really does seem like they these people from this quite small town in Mexico have never seen them, and yet, like you said, when she walks in and sees the footage, and she just believes it, I guess, a documentary. It's just, these people actually go around and do this. So,
it's like when the Great Train Robbery or whatever, when the train was coming towards the camera on screen and everyone would scream and jump out of their seat. Like,
everyone
clearly there's a
out.
train in this theater. People used to be so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, running away from the first ever moving picture you've ever seen.
I simply wouldn't have done that.
Yes,
if I lived back then.
Yes, with my decades of experience watching films in a cinema and IMAX. Yeah, no, I wouldn't do that.
I would have calmly sat still and ate my popcorn.
I felt it was just a little odd. I mean, again,
sure.
They are supposed to be just sort of middle of nowhere in Mexico, as far as I can tell.
I think also that the town that needs saving, Santa Poco, I think they're also, I think they make a point to say they were like impoverished. Like she can't even send a proper telegram. Like they have to shorten a telegram because there's maybe not enough funds to send the full verbiage. So, so I don't know what cars cost back then, but maybe it wasn't practical or affordable.
Yeah, probably. And I remember in 1903 there was something like 50 cars that were brought over, and then by 1906 there were like 500. And it was just starting to build and build and build there. It actually, very odd looking into it, like the car industry in Mexico just started kind of going up, and then around the 40s and 50s, it just tanked.
Oh, really?
I don't remember off the top of my head what it was, but like it just declined for ages, and then it just sort of shot back up again. With Ford actually was one of the ones that really started bringing that in. So
interesting.
Yeah, very odd. But
I think also maybe if this was to be, if there's some sort of remake or something, if they were to make this today or remake it today, I think probably the Amigos would not wear mariachi outfits. That would probably be considered insulting. And I would assume, there's some amount of like the lead sort of the lead woman who kind of first contracts the Amigos to come help the village. Carmen, thank you. There's definitely moments where she has to push past the Amigos' ineptitude and take things into her own hands, like knocking out the guard and all this stuff. So I feel like it doesn't seem like a damsel in distress situation of like these three men have to come save her. Like it seems like she's capable on her own. She has to help them out when they fail. And then also like the town itself uses their strength to defeat the enemy at the end. The Amigos get all the praise, so maybe that would be inverse to where the town is like, we didn't need you in the first place or something. Or even, if we're thinking about casting today, it would probably be maybe one of the Amigos is a woman, and then maybe at the end, instead of the three prettiest women in the town kissing the guys, maybe it would be like the woman gets a guy. I don't know, but it feels like there would probably be some undermining of expectations at the end there versus the three white dudes getting kisses from beautiful residents.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say another part of this that kind of stuck at me a little bit. Again, I understand that it's a comedy and it's weird that these three relatively incompetent people are the ones that save the day, but it really was a little bit of a white savior.
Yes,
thing.
They get the full credit for it.
And then kind of the last thing that was very much that was of the time is the fact that there is a credit in the film. I don't know if you looked at the credits at the end, but the very last credit in the film is for Hot Senorita.
Oh, no.
And that would indeed be the woman who kisses Martin Short at the end.
Uh-huh.
And like that.
What a credit to put on your resume.
Yeah.
Hot senorita.
I mean, and very much again, sort of late 80s, early 90s. There was generally a token hot person, usually female, in the film, and their credit would be something along those lines. And they're just there to be like, either, oh look, isn't it funny that the dweeb got the hot person, or or just, oh look at this hot person.
Yes,
it wasn't quite that with this film, but it very much was a like, oh, that's surprising. Martin Short's character.
I feel 80s had a real a weird dalliance with like nerdy or unexpected person getting like Weird Science or something, where it's like, oh, these two nerds are with this hot model, and it's like, well, they made her, which is problematic in its own right.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think at some point I'm going to be touching on Weird Science, because out of a lot of the films from that era, that one is one of the most problematic I can think of.
Sure, yeah.
But definitely wanted to get a few less hardball ones in first before diving into that. But yeah, I will say, when it comes to this film, I would recommend this film to others, just because, like, again, just because I wasn't laughing out loud at it and that sort of thing. Like, I could see the humor in there. For instance, like you said, the campfire scene where it's just, they are just sitting in front of a giant backdrop and the animals start singing. And it's almost South Park-esque, like original South Park mouths on the horses when they start singing. That was so odd. But I was kind of there for it, like it just kind of worked. And one thing that I actually did crack a smile, because I assumed that the instructions they were given to find El Guapo's camp was bullshit. Yeah. Like, it just sounded like they were just trying to get rid of them. And then it turns out there actually was an invisible swordsman that they killed. Like, thinking back on it, like, that's damn funny.
Pretty impressive effects from 1986 when Chevy Chase shoots the invisible swordsman and you see like an outline of a body smack into the sand. I was like, that's impressive. I don't know if that was practical effects or quote unquote whatever CGI was at the time, but I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, and then Martin Short picks up his hand and drops it, and there's another little indentation. Like, that was either very good blocking, and they were able to get that done in post, or some phenomenal CG work done in some fashion. I do recommend this film to people at this point, and I not only do I think that this film could be made today with some changes, and definitely, like you say, maybe changing up the makeup of the Three Amigos, or giving, I think upon the town people finding out that these guys are idiots, making the townspeople the ones that then turn around and have the ideas, and the Three Amigos are just helping them rather than being the savior. Like, I think that would be a better resolution overall. But yeah, I don't think this film would need to be remade. I don't think there's any clamoring for it, but
I don't think there's an appetite for it. It's still, I mean, I can't stress enough, it still absolutely has a place in my heart. But one, I don't think I'd want to see it remade even as a fan of it, and two, I think most people probably are not fans, or they're apathetic to it, and therefore there's zero appetite for it. I do feel, maybe I'm trying to think of like, I feel like absolutely like Will Arnett would be in this. Like, that type of energy seems fitting. And then from there, I feel like, I mean, I'm trying to think of like my casting versus like studio casting. Like I feel like studio casting would be like Aquafina, and I'm trying to think of who else. Go ahead.
I would say I think number one, if we were going for male Three Amigos, I think Andy Samberg would be.
Oh yeah, that's a good sort of like goofy but trying to be serious energy. That's great.
Yeah, like I think he would either be Lucky or Dusty. I think he would be good in either of those. However, I do think that if this was going to get remade, I feel like it would be funny to do a gender swap of them. And I think that the three people it should be would be Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, and I am blanking on the name right now, but she was also in Bridesmaids and Ghostbusters.
Maya Rudolph? Oh,
no, the other
in
one.
Ghostbusters? Leslie Jones?
No, the other one.
Who's the fourth?
Why am I blanking? That's annoying. She's the main character in Bridesmaid.
Main character. I thought it was Maya Rudolph.
No, not Maya. She's the one that's getting married.
Kristen Wiig?
Yes,
Kristen Wiig. Okay.
Dear, my wife's going to kill me for not being able to remember her name. But I can see those three being being cast in that and being a very good, inept group of people.
Yeah,
doing it.
That's stellar casting. I think I would. If we're going gender swapped, I think like Diane Morgan would be fun.
Okay.
Maybe my favorite comedian going today, Philomena Kunk herself, and then maybe like Ellie Kemper, who plays Kimmy Schmidt, has that sort of like, and she was in The Office as well, but she has that sort of like Martin Short energy of like super sincere, super enthusiastic, like each day is a gift, and like we'll figure it out. Like I feel like she would be a great the Ned Niedermeyer character.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That would be
Nerderlander Niedermeyer. I think I'm conflating a Groundhog's Day character.
And it's a ridiculous last name.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think you're fine. I actually wrote it down. Was it? It's Nederlander.
Nederlander. Yes. I also feel like maybe. I mean, my like all-time favorite is Eddie Murphy. I think he's too old for this, but like Eddie Murphy would be great. I think
he would be a good studio boss.
Yeah. I also feel like Jack Black would be good energy. I feel like he's maybe also Jack Black's maybe who knows, but Chris Tucker I think would be so funny in something like that. But yeah, I'm just trying to think of like energies that would be fitting for the roles. And
I think if you made Kevin Hart the Chevy Chase character, I think that would be good energy.
Okay, I'm not a fan.
Well, I understand that he's very hit or miss with a lot of people, but I think having a really short character being
that would
I think that there would be a lot of good comedy from that. And if it was continuing the theme of they're obviously movie stars, he probably was shot from lower down so that he looked bigger than he was, and
that would you're dead on. That would be a very fun element to play with.
Yeah, I do think this film it is very much a product of its time. With the way that the film goes, and there weren't, aside from the fact that there was an invisible swordsman, there weren't too many surprises into the film. But yeah, I think overall this kind of passes the test that I would have for this series, in that I do think it holds up, but as we say, maybe a couple of things would definitely get changed if it were to be made now.
A little tightening of the screws. I actually just thought of, you said besides the Invisible Swordsman, there's no real surprise. I assume you also meant like the burning bush, because that's like within 30 seconds of each other.
Yeah.
But I think it's surprising, something I've surprised people with because I know it, and maybe it's common knowledge nowadays, and it's not as surprising. But I think it's cool that the singing bush is voiced by Randy Newman, who also co-wrote the movie. And everyone's like, Randy Newman, like, you got a friend in me, Toy Story? I'm like, that's the one.
Yeah, and I think he did like 3 or 4 songs for it as well. Like all the songs that they sing, he wrote as well. Which I saw his name, and then when they started singing, I was like, yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
Very much.
But he also wrote a lot of this, not a lot, but he wrote, X amount of the script as well, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, no, and it's something that you don't really think of from Randy Newman. Like, you think all of these old, just slower songs and everything, but no, actually penning a script with Steve Martin, and because of course he has his hand in everything in those times, Lorne Michaels.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have too much more to say other than I do recommend this to people, especially if they are a fan of Steve Martin, Martin Short, and so on. If you're a fan of Chevy Chase, good for you, I guess. But
good for you. Why don't you do a pratfall down the stairs, buddy?
Yeah, go on.
Didn't he? What's the thing about? There's some weird fact about Chevy Chase. He started the band Steely Dan. Is that it? I think he started Steely Dan, and then he either left or the band kicked him out.
I had to say, I'm not sure off the top of my head. He just having a quick look here. He played the drums in a college band that was headed by the 2 people that then founded Steely Dan.
I see. Okay.
He also apparently has perfect pitch.
Oh, that's impressive.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting, because I have to say, during the scene where they are all singing around the campfire, it looked like he was either dubbed or singing along to a track. Like, it didn't quite look right, but the other 2 I did buy. So and
he also sort of puts on, anytime a lot of times he sings in the movie, it's like a like a very which I think he also does in Christmas Vacation. Like, I think he likes to sort of go the weird route. Yeah,
I mean, it's a stick that he does. So absolutely.
There's nothing people don't like when you're super talented. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not funny to have a beautiful voice.
Yeah. It's kind of like Chris Hemsworth. It's some people have all the bloody luck. It's just
yeah. When he was like funny in Thor Ragnarok and Ghostbusters and stuff, I'm like, come on, man. What, leave something for the rest of us? What are you doing?
Yeah. No. I actually, speaking of the Ghostbusters, I mentioned it in that recording there, but like, probably my favorite bit from that film, hand down, is the entire joke that he is asking which of his headshots looked best. It's him playing jazz, and it's him playing as a doctor playing the saxophone, or listening to jazz, and he's got the saxophone to his ear.
It's a good bit.
Yeah. And then, and the weirdest part in that bit is that the thing that he's actually asking about, which one makes him look most like a doctor, in the credits, there is another headshot of him where he actually is dressed like a doctor with a stethoscope. Like, they actually bring it back for a final button at the end. So
that's very good.
Yeah, but yeah. So bring it back to this. Then, like I said, I don't think I have anything else to touch on with this one. Was there anything else you wanted to go over with this, or do you think we have given it all that we need to?
I think we've covered everything. Something that just popped into my head 3 seconds ago is just to toss out another casting option. Maybe Charlie Day, but he might also be too old. I'm trying to think of, like, Steve Martin and Chevy Chase must have been fairly old. Must have been late 30s, early 40s, maybe? Who knows? Steve Martin's hard to pin down because I think he went completely white at 25, his hair. So he's always hard to sort of figure out. Yeah. But I feel like Charlie Day from Always Sunny would be very funny in the Martin Short role.
Well, I can say because I happen to have his page open here. Chevy Chase at the time that the film came out was 43.
Okay, yeah, so I wasn't too far off.
So yeah, no,
but it's one of those things where it's like you hear, was it like George Wendt and John Ratzenberger in Cheers, where they're like during when Cheers first came out, they were like 31 or something. It's like people just looked older back then, maybe. So I think it's always hard to discern. But just wanted to toss out Charlie Day, and then after that, I think I'm completely done. Wait, no, I think I'm done.
No, okay. All right, well, yes, we have chucked out Charlie Day. But yeah, seriously, once again, thanks so much for coming on. It's always a blast to have you here. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And if people wanted to get a hold of you or hear you in other things, where would they go to do so?
If you want to get a hold of me, call me at 309. I forget the rest of my number. But you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram. I believe they're both at Adal Rifai, ADALRIFAI. So you could DM me there. Also, you can find me on the podcasts Hello from the Magic Tavern, which is an improvised fantasy podcast. You can find me on Hey Riddle Riddle, which is a improv-filled riddle podcast. And you can find me on a show called Tell Me About It, which is a game show where people explain to me their passions and hobbies and knowledge points.
Nice. And yeah, I will say, for anyone that heard you say, Hey Riddle Riddle, it's a improv riddle podcast, like, yeah, go listen to it. It's a lot of fun.
Speaking of, I feel like Janet Varney would make a good Three Amigos.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good shout. Which one would she be? I mean, I could see her doing a good Lucky. Yeah, I think she definitely has the chops for that. That would be
agreed. Yep, agreed.
All right, okay.
So maybe we do remake it and we cast Janet Varney. Maybe she plays all three. Maybe she plays all three roles, and it's a trick of the camera.
Yeah, it's Nutty Professor thing.
Oh,
she
yes,
just plays a whole bunch of characters.
That's one that couldn't be remade today.
Yeah, I haven't watched that since I first watched it, but I feel like that probably an iffy one.
Well, it's actually the minute I said it, because in my head I'm like, I don't think anything with a fat suit would ever get made today, and then I'm like, oh, The Whale just won the Oscar for Brendan Fraser, so again, I don't think my finger's on the pulse of the zeitgeist.
Well, now, be fair, I haven't seen it yet. I fully plan on seeing it as soon as I can, but that is a drama. Like, it's not.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Yes. It's not a Hallow Shall. It's not a Shallow Hal situation.
No, it's not. And that's another good poll. I may need to put that one down for a future.
I've never seen it. Never seen it, but I remember watching the trailer and just like cringing, being like, "Oh."
Yeah, I'd say that one came out around about the same time as another film that, in thinking of that film, made me think of the idea for this series, which is 40 Days and 40 Nights.
40 Days, 40 Nights. What? I don't think I've ever heard of that.
That is a film where, and I believe it's Josh Hartnett. I might be wrong, but
it's a vampire movie.
Is that the name of the vampire film?
I think Josh Hartnett was in a vampire movie called 40 Days and 40 Nights, but I never saw it. I just, once you said Josh Hartnett, I was like, oh, I think I remember seeing a trailer for a vampire movie by that name.
Weirdly,
yeah,
I believe Josh Hartnett is in a vampire film that is related. It's something similar to that, but he is also in, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas, comedy called 40 Days and 40 Nights, where after he breaks up with a girlfriend, he vows to stay celibate for 40 days. As in, he gives up all forms of sex for Lent. And in just thinking about the film and having watched it once, I'm absolutely certain that film could never get made today, especially given the ending.
Curious now. I'm so curious now. I looked it up. The movie I was thinking of was 30 Days of Night.
That's it, yeah.
So he's involved in a lot of numbers. Was he in Lucky Number 11? Possibly.
Hartnett? Yes. Yes, he is.
What's going on with you in numbers? And also, where are you? I don't think we've seen you in anything in some time. I hope you're okay.
He actually was just in an episode of Black Mirror that came out.
Phew. Oh, good. I've only seen the first one, which was the Salma Hayek.
Jonah's Awful.
Yes.
I am up to the third one. Which the third one is the one he was in, he as a person is clearly doing well. His character in that, maybe not so much.
Sorry, Paul. I feel like you were wrapping up the show, and then I was like, I have some fuel to burn here. Apologies.
Not a problem. That's part of the reason why I love doing this is because people that I have on, yourself included, that you never know where it's going to go. But yes, so obviously people now know where to find you if you want to find myself or this podcast. On the social media. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you've already found the actual podcast. But, we are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Blokebusters. You can email us at theblokes@blokebusters.com. You can send a carrier pigeon if you want. I'm not sure I'll get it, but you can give it a go. With all that being said, one more time, thank you very much for coming on. Always a blast.
Thank you.
No problem at all. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.
In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Hang on a minute, lads. I've got a great idea.
Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.